how do we sell this? How do we persuade more people to say, yeah, federalism makes sense. I agree that we should kind of have the federal government do a little bit less, states do a little bit more across a wide array of policy areas. And Jennifer, I want to start with you and maybe articulate an anecdote that I've had this conversation a few times with people on various sides of the ideological spectrum. One of the policy areas that I focus on in Death Force here at Sutherland is upward mobility, poverty, safety net reform, that kind of thing. And so there's a lot of talk about federalism in that issue space as well. And so when I make the case that, well, let Utah be a little bit more innovative and flexible on this or any policy area, and we'll do a better job. I have a lot more faith and trust in our legislature, our governor, our state agencies than I do in Congress and federal agencies. And that's not a criticism of our congressional delegation. We work very well with many folks back in Washington. It's just an acknowledgement of what I think Bill said earlier, which entities are just simply better suited to doing certain kinds of things. So what I want to ask you is, when I pitch that to people and say, well, we should let states have a little bit more or a lot more authority to be autonomous, to be innovative across a wide array of policy areas, the pushback is usually, yeah, but Nick, then some state over here is going to do something that I don't like, that it's really bad. And if you're a conservative, you say, well, I don't want Illinois and New York and California to do whatever they want. And if you're on the political left, you say, well, I don't want Utah or Alabama to do whatever they want. So Jennifer, maybe to start, how do we address that kind of, I guess, political concern that if we have too much federalism, some states may do things that I oppose? How do we respond to that?
It's a valid question, and we're seeing this play out in real time, especially too with the Trump administration and the election of the New York mayor, right? There's discussion about what the federal government or the administration's response should be for New York potentially becoming communist or socialist or whatever direction he's going to take it. And my whole thing is I would much rather have the ability for, what do they say, 50 flowers to bloom, for states to experiment, even states to do poor experiments. There's benefits to letting California be California and Vermont to be Vermont, to experience and fail in real time before these ideas are then taken nationwide. Because once they are taken nationwide and that power then is just shoved down to all 50 states, you're not going to have the ability then to have some of the more free market ideas, conservative communities, being able to flourish.
Bill and Christine, maybe Bill, starting with you. Are you willing to have some states maybe quote unquote fail in some areas in order to allow other states to be really successful in pursuit of federalism?
Yes, and I think partially because in order to allow some states to succeed, we have to have the possibility that some states fail. I mean, just as a practical matter, it's not going to be the case that the federal government will be able to always get this right. They're not close enough to individuals. We filed a brief in a case involving the use of public lands by the federal government, and one of the things we found is that states really have come up with very successful, both red and blue states, right, if you use that color coding, have come up with great ways to do things like manage land, to support schools, to do fire prevention efforts, all of these kinds of things. And the federal government's comparative efforts in these areas have been catastrophically bad in some cases, and that's not because the federal government are not good people or they're not trying to do things that are worth doing, but they're just not close to those who are actually affected by the decisions. They don't have that authority, and as a result, the likelihood of catastrophic failure across the board is higher when you only have one decision maker who can get everything wrong, as opposed to 50 or even many more when you think about local communities can make many of these decisions that can try and then say, well, gosh, our neighbor's doing a much better job. They don't seem to have the same trouble we are. Let's do that. Then they can't, obviously there is a risk of failure, but the risk of success or the possibility of success is much greater in that kind of circumstance where some creativity and innovation is allowed for.
Christine, you've written often about this idea, as I recall, that education policy is largely a state and local issue. Does this all jive with you? I mean, is it fair to say that in Utah we want to be allowed to educate our kids the way that comports with Utah values and objectives, and let's let California and other states do what they're going to do. Is that kind of a fair summation?
Yes, it is. And I mean, the example that both Jennifer and Bill gave about if you start at the federal level with a policy and it's a bad policy, then everyone is suffering, right? We've seen that when the federal government has tried to lead out on major policy laws like No Child Left Behind or even the Common Core scheme, and how much pushback there was, and it was radioactive. It's just not where education policy needs to start. Um, the other thing I would say is, in some ways, federalism is something where common sense kind of leads you to certain answers, right? Education is such a human-based, one-on-one endeavor that the closer you get to that experience, the more likely you're going to get better policy. So the idea that the federal government, in Washington, D.C., really knows what's going on in your state, in your school district, just doesn't make a lot of sense on a practical, common sense way. But we also see this bearing out. We've had an increase of federal intervention over decades around, if you want to pinpoint like the 1960s and some of these federal funds, but no corresponding academic gains. So you'd say like, well, is this really working? I think we can be safe to leave this in the hands of the states. One issue that's come up a lot in education too is, well, if you remove some of these safeguards, will states prioritize vulnerable students? Will they do an adequate job? I think a lot of states have let out. Charter schools are a response to students that need other options or aren't doing well. And education choice is often geared towards low income or students with special needs. So I think states really are the champions of a lot of these different groups.
Jennifer, I would love to see if there's a way to frame this as a bipartisan consensus issue. So I'm curious, given your vantage point with the Center for Practical Federalism, obviously you all are having these conversations at the national level and throughout the country at the state level. Is there messaging that you've seen that's successful and sort of framing this as, yeah, wherever you are on the political spectrum, this actually is good. You should like this. And is there a way to sort of connect it to regular daily life for folks to make it tangible and bipartisan that more federalism just makes sense?
Well, Christine mentioned something earlier that just kind of caught my attention. She said that this is common sense. And so we've been saying federalism is not Republican, it's not Democrat, right? It's American. And every governor, no matter the red, blue, no matter who's in the White House, regardless of party, knows what it feels like when they're in that mother may I relationship with Washington, D.C., right? Waiting for a waiver to get approved, a grant approval, maybe grant requirements change. State leaders want flexibility, right, to solve local problems without waiting for permission. So I think, just the basic thing to ask is, who do you want making decisions for your local community? The folks that that are elected in your local cities, your counties, and your states, or a federal official that flies to DC, Congress, maybe even a federal bureaucrat? I think most folks, and actually polling shows that most folks want community problems solved by people in their community.
Well, we're almost out of time, so I want to go to my last question, which is kind of the 30-second elevator type question where we're just going to kind of try and condense this message down into a nugget that our audience can remember and can use in some of their conversations. And Bill, I'll start with you, then go to Christine, then Jennifer, give you the last word. And I want to ask you to do this. If you really had just a few seconds, 30 seconds or so, and you had to explain or convey the message that, look, all of the recent commotion with the federal shutdown should renew our collective commitment to federalism, what would you say? What's like the juiciest, most compelling thing to just help us remember that we shouldn't be so reliant on the federal government? This latest shutdown is evidence of why. How do we make that message in a concise, compelling way?
Well, I think what I would say is that it's common sense that we want to diversify our sources of support to do the critical work that we need done. And when we see, like Jennifer described, that some states are letting even a majority of their funding come from one source that's a highly unstable source, that over the last couple of decades is failing to actually come through over and over again. That's got to be a wake-up call to us, that we can figure out ways to do things better, and that with some simple contingency planning, there is a way forward, and some states have demonstrated that that's possible. So I think that's what I would say.
Christine, what's the most compelling message that links these two things together and says that this is why we should re-embrace federalism?
I think, this has been a hiccup and there's going to be more hiccups. And if we want to be forward thinking, we should think about how to reduce this kind of dependency as much as possible so that states can just act within their sphere and feel confident in that.
Jennifer will give you the last word. Leave us with some inspiration, some words of wisdom we can carry forward.
As somebody who lives in DC, I can attest, right? This federal government shutdown proves that Washington cannot be trusted to keep the lights on, right? Federalism ensures that states can, because it gives them control, it gives them decision-making power to keep essential programs running, even when Washington, D.C. is not doing what they should be doing. So it's not about smaller government. It's about smarter, closer, accountable government that keeps working even when D.C. folks don't.
Thanks for watching that clip of Defending Ideas. For the full conversation, click the link in the description and make sure to like and subscribe wherever you get your shows.